Sam, good afternoon. I'm Andrew Main. I've never met a philanthropic person before. Maybe I have, I just didn't know I had. I'd like you to tell me a bit about your history with the Pratt Foundation, which I understand is actually the longest running foundation of its sort in Australia.
Not quite the longest running. It is one of the longest running. There are some other family foundations that preceded Pratt, most notably the Meyer and Potter foundations, but we are one of the, 40 years doesn't seem like a very long time when you compare it to some of the American foundations that go back to the 19th century, like the Rockefeller Foundation and the Carnegie Trust and so on and so on. By Australian standards, yes, we're one of the oldest, and this year, 2018, we're celebrating our 40th anniversary. Concurrently with Visy, the Pratt family's packaging and recycling company, which is celebrating its 70th anniversary. Right. And I might just add, the third anniversary is the 20th anniversary of the production company, which is Jean Pratt's initiative.
Oh, right.
So at different levels of the family's interests, their business interests, their philanthropic interests, and their interest in musical theatre and show business are all reflected in this triple hit that we're having to celebrate in 2018. But to get back to what you said at the beginning, whether you've met a philanthropic person or not, I must disavow any suggestion that I'm the philanthropist. As I explain, I'm the philanthrocrat. And
what about the Pratt philanthrocrat?
I'm a Pratt philanthrocrat, exactly. Yeah. My role is as CEO of the Pratt Foundation, which is the administrative role. My actual role is as one of the two independent trustees of the Pratt Family Foundation under the various arrangements which govern philanthropic trusts in Australia. What you usually have, at least the kind that the Pratt family has developed, is you have members of the family.
Yes. In
our case, the matriarch, Jean Pratt, her son Anthony, and her two daughters, Eloise Pratt and Fiona Gaminda. They are the family trustees, and I and my co-independent trustee, Ian Allen, that's a requirement of the guidelines that govern the law.
You've got to be an outsider.
Requires independent trustees. So yes, I'm the philanthrocrat. I act on behalf of the family who give us, both Ian Allen and myself, our writing instructions, our budget, and within that we have some freedom to operate, but essentially we're there to reflect, on the one hand, the family's desires and wishes in the way they want to give their money away, and then equally we, or I in particular, have a responsibility to Anthony Pratt for the corporate philanthropy side of the business interests.
So does that, who gets the begging letters then?
Well, all the members of the family, I think, have been getting begging letters since they were all in short pants, as did Richard Pratt when he was alive, and they just keep coming, inevitably. There are also letters and emails nowadays, of course, addressed to the Pratt Foundation. Some 16 years ago now, in 2002, we thought we put out a statement which said, we are no longer able to consider unsolicited submissions, and the reason for that was we had become some of the most overpaid clerical workers in Australia, just responding to hundreds and in over a year thousands of requests. Well, we thought that just by declaring it, that would put an end to it. Well, it hasn't.
Did it reduce it at all?
It reduced it somewhat, but then we made the mistake of putting this on our website and saying so. So now people come to our website and many letters begin, "We know that you no longer accept unsolicited submissions, however. And yes, they look. we have another tradition in the Pratt Foundation, certainly for Ian Allen and myself, which over the years we've tried to observe, which is we think it's terribly important to be able to sit on both sides of the table. And each of us have sat, in Ian Allen's case, I think over the years he's probably sat on about 15 different not-for-profit boards.
Yes.
I've sat on 8 or 9. I've chaired a couple. And in those capacities, each of us know what it is to go, literally cap in hand, and this is what you do when you are on a not-for-profit board. You either give, you get, or you get off. And if you're not...
a pretty simple arrangement, really.
But it is a simple arrangement.
Yeah.
And I can empathise. I've sat on boards where I've had to go to government and ask, but also to ask private donors. Yeah. And I think I learned a lesson a long time ago from somebody who said, just remember one thing, Sam, you're never asking for yourself. And I thought to myself, well, that's obvious. Why hadn't I thought of that?
Yeah.
But it always feels as if when you're begging someone to support even the greatest cause in the world, as if I'm asking. Yeah. So you have to sort of step outside yourself a bit. No, this is what I'm here for. Yeah. I'm a director, I'm a trustee of this organization. Yeah. I actually care about it. So please, if you can, it'd be great if you could support us. And if you succeed, nothing greater than walking out of an interview with somebody. Yes. If not check in hand, then at least the promise of one.
Yes, that's great. Now, we have really been talking, I think, within Australia, but you've obviously travelled extensively. I know Vizzy's got enormous interests around the world. And you would get to do you get to the States a little bit?
Yes, because in the United States, the corporate side of the business is Pratt Industries USA, which is the company which Anthony, initially with the help of Richard, his father, but then completely and largely on his own, and certainly since his father's passing, completely on his own. Yeah. Pratt Industries USA is a thriving packaging and recycling business.
I was going to say there's really a two-part question.
The Pratt Foundation operates in the United States.
Does it operate there? And because obviously if that's where the business is, there's a certain amount of social logic in having the foundation there. How does philanthropy differ in the States from how it operates here?
Well, there are some legal differences about the way in which foundations have to report. You can't establish a foundation in the United States without undertaking to give a certain percentage each year of if you have a corpus, if you have as many foundations do, they start off with, let us say, they start off with $10 million. Yeah. You're required under law in the United States, if you want to claim the benefits of being a tax-deductible foundation,
logical enough.
You are required to give away a minimum of 5% of the income derived from your corpus, for example.
Yeah, you're not talking about the whole value of the...
No. So 5% of the income, let's say, from $10 million. Yeah. We don't have a similar requirement in Australia. We're probably 2, maybe 3 generations behind. Historically, what we understand to be so-called modern philanthropy, there was always philanthropy. I mean, wealthy people in different societies at various times, whether they were the Medicis or whoever they were, gave to good causes as they saw them. Yeah. What we understand when we talk about American philanthropy, we're really talking about Rockefeller and Carnegie. They were the 2 towering figures at the end of the 19th century who set the model, the business model, if you like, for what followed. And it took a while, and though Rockefeller and Carnegie are now, in terms of each of those foundations, more than a century old, the fact is that philanthropy only comes with significant wealth. Significant wealth in the United States has been around for about let's say 60, 70, 80 years longer than it has in Australia. Significant wealth in Australia is a relatively, historically speaking, recent phenomenon. There were some significant philanthropists. In Melbourne, for example, the famous Felton Bequest, which has been supporting museums and galleries and so on. But once you move away from one or two bequests and the Meyer Trust and the Meyer Foundation, I mean, Sidney Meyer was left his money in the 1930s, and that was a huge turning point in the history of philanthropy in Australia. Relatively speaking, though, you can't talk about philanthropy as a significant force in Australia before about the 1980s. There was individual philanthropy, but not organised or corporate or foundation philanthropy.
And could I assume that in general terms, corporate, well, you called it organised, that's a good word, I take it that can often get more bang for the buck when you talked about organised philanthropy, because you can arrange for continuity. Therefore, the happy recipients might know that they're not going to get all their money in year one. Some of them, you'll be saying to them, you're going to get money, X amount of money in so and so many years. Is that how it works?
In many cases, exactly. It works on the basis that, and nowadays it might sound like a bit of jargon, but I think at base it's valid. Philanthropy has become interchangeable with social investment, and the connotation is clear, which is that the donor, whether it's a foundation or an individual, is increasingly asking the recipient, first of all, why should I give you money? And then coming to some reasonable conclusion that it would be worth investing, how do we set the investment up in such a way so that we're reasonably certain there will be some return? That return is not monetary.
No, it's not.
But it is a return in terms of the results and aspirations of the recipient. I can always remember when I've been professionally involved in philanthropy this year for 20 years, but for some 15 or 16 years prior, I was a trustee. But when I, as it were, had to earn my living, I thought, I better learn something about philanthropy. So the first thing I did was, as you've suggested, off I went to the United States. And I began to learn all this jargon. And the first piece of jargon that I came across was KPIs. And we're talking now 20 years ago. And I thought to myself, and I was sitting in a so-called workshop with some 18 or 20 of these very experienced American CEOs of their foundations. And they're saying KPIs, got to have KPIs. And of course, if you don't have KPIs, you've got nothing. You must have your KPIs. And I, of course, being from Australia and new to this, I pretended I knew exactly what they were talking about. And I didn't have a clue, because I hadn't heard the term KPI before. But because I'd had a previous life as a journalist, the only similar sort of series of initials that I'd ever heard was not KPI, but I had heard PKI, which was Partij Komunisti Indonesië. And I thought to myself, these people can't be talking about the history of the Communist Party of Indonesia. So I thought to myself, if they're not talking about that, what could they be possibly? So, of course, to learn not the jargon, but what do key performance indicators mean in philanthropy? And we often say to an organization, not with, let's say, a relatively small donation, if it turns out that we are, for whatever reason, providing, I don't know, $25,000 or $30,000, because that's all we've been asked for, or that's all we think is relevant we're not going to ask for KPIs, but sometimes when it's 6 figures, or in some cases 7 figures, and as you've suggested, spread out over a period. So at the end of year one, we say, this is a 3-year or 5-year commitment depending on the KPIs at the end of year one.
Yeah.
What are the key performance indicators? And we always say to an organization, you tell us,
Yes.
what are the key performance indicators that you want to set for yourself that will tell you that you are justifying the money we're investing?
Yeah.
I know nothing about microsurgery, but we've supported some medical research facilities that happen to be interested in microsurgery.
Yeah.
But I feel fully confident about going to the director of microsurgery and saying, you set out in simple language, not in technical language, if we commit $400,000 over the next 3 years, what are the results that you will judge justify the money we've invested in you? That's not just key performance indicators, that's the return on social investment. That the organization, and we always, whether it's a microsurgeon or whether it's a director of an art gallery, if they can't articulate those key performance indicators, we step back. Because if you don't know what you're expecting, why should we be investing?
Your logic's impeccable.
So usually, provided that they come up with, and it's not, there is a tendency in some newer circles in philanthropy to try and put numbers on everything.
Yeah. You don't.
Well, I'm skeptical of that because because I'm skeptical of social engineering generally.
Yes.
But I do think there are ways where you can set out expected outcomes and results without having to put figures on literally everything. You know, you're going to perform microsurgery on 37 new patients.
Yeah.
But there are other ways to go about presenting what you expect.
But I think what you're saying to me, Sam, is that anybody who comes to the Pratt Foundation looking for financial support is going to have to explain very clearly what they want to do and explain what they plan to do in the following few years without nailing themselves to the deck. I guess they will give you a pitch that's somewhere between their pessimistic assessment and their optimistic assessment.
Oh, sure.
Because if they go all optimistic on you, that's going to be tears before bedtime at the end of year one.
Yes, but equally, you want them to have some confidence in their own ability to achieve the results that they're proposing.
So, meaning if they're too pessimistic,
equally,
you're going to say, well, why should we bother? It doesn't look as though this is going to move the needle at all.
Precisely, and I think that some of the lessons learned about, I mean, I'm not an investor I don't have any shares. I once had one set of shares in the stock exchange many years ago. It was actually in a medical field because I knew the person. He was a brilliant hematologist.
Yes.
What I knew about hematology could fill the back, not even of a postage stamp. But I knew this guy was brilliant.
Yes.
And he came up with an invention, and he marketed it and raised funds, and you could buy shares in his company.
So off you went.
But that's it. That's my sole experience of real investing.
So did it go well as a matter of idle speculation?
Well, I actually sold them, and they had appreciated, and I made a small capital gain.
There you go.
And you would think that would have made me, no, it had no effect on me whatsoever. And that's not, I would claim no particular understanding of how the stock exchange, but it works or what the investment rules are or aren't. But what I think I have learned is that social investment has its own set of rules. They're not all that different from what I've read, other things that you do when you, and I think, there are great mentors in philanthropy. And I was fascinated to read that Bill Gates, and I think you can be reasonably sure that he's a formidable figure in the world of philanthropy. Yep. And he said that many of the fellow philanthropists that he meets haven't yet come to the point that took him many years to arrive at, which is time. And he literally said, you've got to put in as much time and take your philanthropy as seriously as he used to take his business and his investment in the business.
But I mean, Sam, you can see there's an obvious problem that very few people can make enough of a fortune in the space of the first 30 years of their career.
Yes.
That they can start distributing largesse.
That's true, and I think it's fair to say that philanthropy, at least as we understand it generally, and I want to make a distinction between philanthropy and giving. Philanthropy. I mean, I don't want to be too hung up on semantics, but I think if words have meaning, philanthropy can't be too general a term. It is, I think, rightly defined as a more systematic, more focused, and I would say more educated form of giving. At its heart, it is a charitable idea of supporting either a cause or an individual or usually a group who are doing good things, improving the world, making the world a better place. That said, I don't think you can think about giving to charity, as I said to you at the beginning, I'm a philanthropist. I have some charities that I like to support because I think they're important, but the scale of my support is insignificant by philanthropic standards. And I wouldn't claim I'm being philanthropic if I support an organization and give them $500.
Yeah, that's right.
That's not philanthropy.
Yes.
And I'm not spending my time checking deeply. I'm not asking for their balance sheet each time I give, the Brotherhood of St. Lawrence $60 or something.
Yes, exactly.
So philanthropy, I think, has to dimension, but more importantly, as to it's systematized charity, if I can put it that way. There has to be some organizational structure, even if it's an individual. You don't have to have a foundation to be philanthropic. Yeah. There are many donors who aren't interested in having a foundation and want to be the sole social investor. And that's fair enough too. Yeah. But they take as much time and do as much due diligence. Yeah. I mean, that phrase, I like that phrase, due diligence. Yeah. And we can't do it with all we just don't, when it's not big enough. Yeah. But with all of our key donations, we spend time. Sometimes months elapse between receiving the original submission, having the first interview, going to the field visit, coming back, getting some peer assessment, getting some independent assessment. If it's a large donation, I always remember the stories around the Ford Foundation. It used to be said of the Ford Foundation that they spent, for every $1 million grant that they made, they spent $900,000 checking it out.
This is Henry Ford.
No. This is... These are his descendants. By now, I think his great-great-grandchildren.
Yes, that's right, because I think he was a bit of a rapscallion himself.
He was. I don't think he was all that philanthropic, shall we say.
I think that's possibly the biggest understatement I've heard in a very long time, Sam. Look, that's terrific. I really appreciate your time, Sam, because I think that a lot of people have got some pretty woolly ideas about philanthropy, and they imagine that there's somebody sitting in a very expensive chair blowing on a dandelion or saying eeny, meeny, miny, mo.
No, I would hope it's never like that.
But no, Sam, I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much indeed.
Andrew, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.